Okay, today we are going to be looking at modelling cloth and modelling cloth over a solid object. So something like a bed sheet or something like a tablecloth would be two examples. So the first thing we're going to need is we're going to need to put in two objects. We're going to put in a plane, which is going to act as our tablecloth. And then we're going to put in what we call a chamfer box, which will act as our mattress or table or whatever you want it to be. Now you will notice that I have got a very large number of length and width segments. The higher the number you can get away with without going over the top, the better the folds you will have on your bed or on your sheet. I've probably gone slightly overboard with this in terms of I probably don't need quite that many in there, but for the purposes of demonstration, it will work. So we've got the plane from the standard primitives. We're going to change our standard primitives down to our extended primitives this time, and our chamfer box is right there. Now what a chamfer box does, it works very similarly for setting up as a regular box, in that you do your base, you do your height, and that would be your normal box. But when you click to let go of the height, you have a third setting, and that is the amount of curve that your chamfer box actually has. The bigger the amount of curve you have, the rounder your box will be. And I've just accidentally clicked that. So if you do accidentally click, you have a fillet setting on the chamfer box, which you should really get from the Modify tab, which will allow you to change how much chamfer there actually is. And that should give you a box with nice rounded corners. The reason we want rounded corners is so that we don't end up with a corner sticking through our material. So I'm just going to grab my move tool and move my material plane here so that it is above my box. And then I'm going to apply the cloth modifier. So from the modifier, drop down, get the cloth, and all of our settings are in here. First thing to check is to actually scroll to the bottom and enable self-collision. If that's not selected, your cloth will go through itself as if it doesn't have any substance at all. The next bit that we want is the object properties. Now this is where we tell 3ds Max what is a piece of material or a piece of cloth and what is a collision object that the cloth will hit and either fold around or not fold through. So I'm going to add object and add the chamfer box, and I'm going to set my chamfer box to a collision object. I'm going to select my plane and turn it to cloth, and then there are a number of different settings that you can use to give you an approximation of real life fabrics, or you can just leave it to the default that it comes up with. Once you've done that, click OK, and then press Simulate Local. And what should happen is your cloth should fall down and wrap itself around the chamfer box that you've put in. Now I've done this with a box and set this with a chamfer box. You can do this with any shape. You can do it with a sphere, cones. You can make your own shapes and do it with your own shapes. So long as you remember that when you are finished and you are happy with how your cloth is lying, turn the Simulate Local off. Now that was done with the wool setting, and you can see how that's lying set as wool. And just to give you an idea of what different material might come out like, I'm going to reset the state of my object, which will put it back into a flat plane. Now if I go back into the object properties and select the plane, and let's say I go for silk this time, And let's just see if I simulate local, if this looks any different to the way the wool wrapped itself around. Now it has sort of fallen through and is now sort of bringing itself back out of the box. Don't worry too much about that. It's the process that it goes through, but you can see straight away, if I turn the simulate local off, it hasn't quite finished wrapping round, but it folds on itself a lot more than it did with the settings for the wool. And then I could reset the state again, go back to the object properties, and let's say we have something heavy leather, and this should look different again to the two examples that we've just seen. In fact, that's going to look so different that it's barely going to catch and it's going to fall right the way through. So sometimes, depending on our settings, it might not work in exactly the way that we want it to, and having to play around with some of the settings might be required to get the look that you want. So heavy leather in this case did not attach itself particularly well. And that is how we would set up and use a basic cloth modifier. One thing that is worth noting is my chamfer box does also have a lot of segments in it. And again, like with the cloth and plain for the cloth, the box for the segments is needed. Otherwise, your cloth will fall through your box because there will be less there for it to actually connect with.